The Arab Spring started in Tunisia in late 2010 after a poor street vendor burned himself to death. Young people across the Arab world quickly joined protests. They were full of hope and anger. Social media and outside voices told them they could turn their countries into something like Switzerland, rich, modern, free, and developed. They believed that if the old dictators left, democracy and money would arrive fast. This was a childish fantasy that cost hundreds of thousands of lives and ruined entire nations. Young men and women went out to protest. They were encouraged by Western governments, Qatar's Al Jazeera, Turkey, and various activists. Many thought it would be quick and glorious. Instead, they became cannon fodder. They protested, they fought, they died in large numbers, and in the end, most countries became much worse, not better. The protesters were sold beautiful dreams, dignity, jobs, freedom, and justice. In reality, they were often manipulated. Naive young people with smartphones believed the slogans. They risked everything. Many paid with their lives or their future. Once the old rulers were weakened or removed, the real players moved in. The ordinary people who started it all got little or nothing. Their countries fell into chaos, and the problems they hated, corruption, poverty, lack of opportunity, stayed or became even worse. The movement did not create Switzerland. It created failed states, war zones, and slave markets. The real winners were outside powers. Leaders like Gaddafi in Libya and Assad in Syria did not always obey Western demands blindly. They had their own agendas, made deals with whoever they wanted, and sometimes resisted. After the Arab Spring, Gaddafi was overthrown and killed in a disgusting way with NATO help from the US, France, Britain, and you know. The message was clear: if you don't listen, we can remove you. Once these rulers were gone, the countries did not become democracies. They became playgrounds for militias, warlords, and foreign interests. Big powers completed their mission. They removed disobedient leaders. Then they mostly stepped back and watched the chaos. Libya turned into a nightmare. After Gaddafi fell, the country collapsed into tribal fighting and militia rule. There was no stable government. Cities were destroyed. Oil money disappeared into the pockets of armed groups. Worst of all, Libya became a real slave market. African migrants were bought and sold in open markets. People were tortured, raped, and worked like animals in detention centers. This happened in the country that was once relatively stable and rich under Gaddafi. The liberation brought hell instead. Syria became even bloodier. Peaceful protests turned into a savage civil war. Outside powers armed both sides. The chaos created perfect conditions for ISIS to grow strong and declare their caliphate. Beheadings, mass killings, sexual slavery, and religious massacres became normal. Hundreds of thousands died. Millions fled. Syria was ruined for a generation. Yemen fell into famine and endless war. Religious and sectarian conflicts were encouraged and made worse. Old hatreds between Sunni and Shia, tribes, and Islamists exploded. The Arab Spring did not bring unity or progress. It opened the door to division and slaughter. The chaos served other purposes too. With governments destroyed and borders open, especially in Libya, huge numbers of people started moving toward Europe. Smugglers operated freely. Boats full of people crossed the Mediterranean every day. A very large share were military-age men, young, strong males. This was not purely accidental. One of the results of the Arab Spring was the huge surge in migrants heading to Europe. Wars and chaos in Syria, Libya, and other places pushed millions to flee. After Gaddafi fell, Libya's borders and coast became wide open. Smuggling networks exploded. Overcrowded boats crossed the Mediterranean. Thousands drowned. Those who reached Europe created major challenges: high costs for housing and welfare, cultural tensions, crime spikes in some areas, and big political fights across the continent. This migrant flood, especially the large numbers of military-age men, young, fit males aged roughly 1835, was not just an unfortunate side effect. Some argue it was an intentional or welcomed consequence of the instability created in 2011. With Gaddafi gone, the old controls on migration from Africa through Libya disappeared. Chaos turned Libya into the main launch pad for boats to Italy and beyond. The heavy focus on military-age males fits patterns where young men are sent on journeys, but critics see something more calculated, a way to shift demographics in Europe, weaken social cohesion, or create cheap labor and political pressure. This view ties into broader, great replacement ideas. The claim that elites in Europe and elsewhere wanted to replace native populations with migrants from the Middle East and Africa. Whether fully planned from the start or cynically allowed to continue, the outcome was clear. Europe faced record migration pressures after the Arab Spring and Libya intervention. Human traffickers made fortunes in the chaos. European countries spent billions on the consequences while dealing with integration problems, especially with large groups of young men from unstable backgrounds. Supporters of the theory point to how some Western and Gulf policies helped create the vacuum that accelerated these flows. Critics argue this was partly intentional or at least cynically allowed. Remove stable, if dictatorial, rulers, create chaos, open the gates, and watch the human wave hit Europe. Europe got expensive welfare costs, rising crime in some areas, cultural clashes, and political chaos. Native Europeans felt their countries changing fast against their will. Traffickers became rich. Young men from broken societies arrived in large numbers. Whether this was a planned demographic weapon or just extremely reckless regime change policy, the result was the same. Europe is still dealing with the consequences years later. Removing leaders proved easy in some places. Building better systems was much harder. Deep tribal, religious, and economic divisions, weak institutions, and constant foreign meddling made stable democracy almost impossible. Islamist groups won some early votes but often overreached. Militaries and old powers struck back. The original problems, youth unemployment, corruption, lack of real opportunity, stayed or got worse in many countries. The Arab Spring toppled some old leaders but left most places worse. Tunisia had the most democratic progress but still faces big economic and political troubles. Egypt returned to strongman rule. Syria, Libya, and Yemen suffered devastating wars with no clear happy endings. Millions paid with blood, lost homes, and broken futures. If the theory about engineered or accelerated migration holds weight, then parts of the Arab Spring also served as a tool that changed Europe in lasting ways through demographic shifts. In the end, it serves as a strong warning. Popular revolts and foreign-backed regime changes can destroy order without creating anything better. The heavy price is still being paid across the region and beyond. Hope turned into a long nightmare for far too many.